What's this? Number 4 now, Scott.
Number 4. Hi, guys. This is Scott.
So this is becoming a regular thing. We've changed times. For anyone who's not familiar, you can see over my shoulder is sun.
If you're the NSA and you're tuning in live, hi, guys.
Yeah, that's right. So we decided that Scott was waking up at some ungodly hour to do these things, and I wake up at an ungodly hour naturally. So we figured we'd flip it around and make it easier on everybody's home life. We were waking your wife up, right? Was that the deal?
Yeah. She's it's a fair thing. If her bedroom is right next to this office, and so to be woken up 2 or 3 hours before you might want to on a weekly basis is a bit annoying. So
on the weekend as well, which doesn't help.
Had to give her that.
Yeah. So my son, I've had to tell him, I've gone in and said, okay, listen, dude, you need to behave and not yell at the Xbox people. Because if I don't, we'll hear curse words and all kinds of stuff coming through the walls. So we had to stop him.
Okay.
So big week. I guess we'll start as usual with our reviewer shout outs. We've had 2 5-star reviews in our AWS Solution Architect course from Shakil Akram and Praveen Ragnikar. And I practiced those names.
Good job.
I know. I saw them come in this week and I thought, I'm gonna try these. And there was one person who gave us 4 stars, and he shall not be named because he came close, but not quite there.
Well, thank you to Shakil and Praveen. I'm just gonna stick with the first names.
Don't even try.
Yeah.
So what have you been up to this week? What have you tested, and what have you built, and what have you added?
Sure. So I'm getting into a pretty good groove, I feel like. I've been recording videos for my Azure courses, and so I've created some videos about API management. I had a student who wanted to see more information about API management, and I always love it when the students, and especially when there's more than one, and they're like, yeah, I'd love to see some more too, and I'd love to see some more. So I sat down and did 6 or 7 more videos about API management, added them to the course, and now my course is hosted in a couple of different places, so added it to all the different places. And I also did some stuff around, I'm drawing a blank. Dev Test Labs. Now Microsoft, AWS has had this free tier, 1 year of free access for ages, right? And Azure doesn't have that same thing. But with Dev Test Labs, you can, as an administrator almost, create a set of accounts and give people very select permissions to say you can create 2 VMs and you can create 2 VMs, and they auto shut down at 7 o'clock and they auto start up at 9 a.m. And so if you're in a development environment or a training environment or a testing environment, having the ability to control costs essentially and basically give your users, it's almost like white labeling. You give your users a very limited set of images that they can choose from, and not all, $3,000 a month instance types that you can choose from. You can limit it to very good sets. So very interesting getting into Dev Test Labs this week as well. And if that's not enough, I started a new course this week. So I hopefully by January, I'll have Azure database certification course to introduce to the world.
You're a very productive human.
Well, yeah, it's just night times, right? So it's like, I enjoy it. I finally found my calling. I think I get a lot. I got some really good comments this week. I got a student who wrote a really, really good comment, and it just sort of made me. He said he's been to Pluralsight, and he's been to the official Microsoft training, and he's tried another one which I hadn't even heard of. But my course was the best. And it's just like, wow, thank you, buddy. That's just like really touching stuff. So I really enjoy it.
We should give out like Amazon gift cards or something for people who leave really excellent comments and really helpful stuff.
Or we can have our own swag.
That's it, man. We can send T-shirts and mugs. And
free coffee mugs. Feeling cloudy.
You're wearing swag right now, right?
Well, I didn't get this for free. This is
No.
a SpaceX T-shirt from the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral.
Mm.
I went there last year, and I just went crazy in the gift shop. Bought a bunch of stuff. Bought a meteorite. Like they sell these little tiny meteorites that fell from Earth. Just a waste of money, but yeah. How about you? You've had a busy week.
I'm wearing the official T-shirt of Big W, which is the Australian version of Target, owned by Woolworths.
Okay.
Not really. It's just a T-shirt I bought there, and I'm drinking my McCafe.
Oh, there we go. One of the best coffees in the world.
Yeah, product placement.
Yeah.
McCafe was started in Australia. There you go. Interesting.
Was it?
Side. Yes, it was. It was an Australian thing, because people here like real coffee and get really crappy when coffee's bad. So there you go. Yeah, I know I had a busy week. I'm trying to think. There was a really fascinating story. We'll talk a little bit about Kubernetes a bit more because we've talked enough about it in the last few weeks, of course. But I had a client I worked with this week that actually, no, sorry, I misstate that. I do a lot of reviews of other people in our organization's documents. I'm sort of a senior enterprise architect, whatever they call me, I don't know. And so part of my job is to do peer review, like high-level peer review, and also effectively check people's homework, right? And so we're not saying something that either we can't do or is technically impossible. So I'm the guy whose job it is to stop selling unicorns. And so that's cool. And so one of them I did this week was the first time I'd actually seen somebody doing in real life bare metal orchestration. So I'd kind of toyed around with it and seen it with OpenStack and a few other things in years gone by, but most people just end up putting like a VM layer. They put a hypervisor and do it that way. But no, I saw some really cool stuff that this company it's a bank, and they're trying to do bare metal on their own premise, and they're trying to orchestrate it out of AWS. So they're using some of the AWS tool set to try and instantiate these effectively containers, but on bare metal, which phenomenal stuff. I mean, I suppose when you're a bank and you have hundreds of millions of dollars in budget, it becomes a lot easier to play with stuff like that, right? But no, it was really clever. So that was kind of interesting this week, and yeah, I just kind of spent the week reviewing a bunch of stuff because I've been so flat out. But thankfully, it's, as we record this, it's the 9th or something of December. And is it the 9th or the 10th? I don't have my phone.
The 9th for me, the 10th for you.
Fair enough. Exactly. And
because you live in the future.
I live in the future. I am from the future. We're getting them ready for the run into Christmas. So this is my son's last week at school, and for 7 or 8 weeks, and then we're starting to get wound down, which will be good. So get back into creation mode in the next week and do some new videos and all that stuff. So yeah, it's been busy but good. The thing that I like is I get to spend a lot of time looking at what other people are doing with cloud. And the buzzword at the moment is multi-cloud orchestration. Every single client you talk to wants multi-cloud orchestration. I don't know why. I haven't seen a particularly great use case for it yet. But yeah.
Nobody wants to be locked in, I guess. They all want to have that flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this before with containers and Docker and Kubernetes and all that stuff. But when you probe the enterprise architects at clients and you say, okay, yep, gotcha. We can give you all kinds of orchestration tools. What are you going to use it for? We did a demo a few weeks ago to a large client. I don't know if I mentioned it, where in the demo live, we instantiated a web server on AWS, a database server on Azure, and a application server in their private cloud, right? And we did it in real time. We literally pushed the button and it all started happening. And they thought we were just pulling a magic trick. And And while they were looking at the screen, we were flipping between the different consoles and showing firewall rules getting created. We were showing the VMs spinning up and all that stuff, right? And then by the end, they were getting emails, with passwords and stuff sent to them. So, so then we said, "This was your requirement. What are you going to do with it?" And they sort of looked at us blankly. It's like, "But it's cool, right?" So yeah, multi-cloud is a big one, but I still haven't heard a lot. So it's kind of interesting getting to see a lot of that stuff, and on a weekly basis, it gives you an appreciation for how deep people are starting to think about this stuff, which is cool.
Yeah, wow. You wouldn't even think about orchestration in bare metal, but I guess when you've got that kind of money, you
yeah, you can try it out and see how it goes, right?
Yeah.
A lot of it's for Oracle. So we're seeing a lot of it with Oracle because of the way they do licensing, and people don't want to get locked into it. So they do core counts rather than virtual cores. And if you put Oracle on a highly virtualized shared environment, you have to license all the cores.
Yeah.
And so people are having to isolate it and stuff. So that's where we're seeing a lot of that.
Well, that justifies it for sure.
Yeah, especially if you're a bank and you use that. You have millions of dollars of Oracle investment. You don't want to have to pay them 8-9 figures. That's not ideal.
Absolutely.
Oh, right. So you had a student question this week you want to talk about?
Yeah, we had a couple. I was going to pick one AWS one and one Azure question. So within the AWS course, we have a section about IP addresses, and specifically how when you're creating networks and subnets within them, you provision them using that CIDR /24 IP range, but Amazon actually reserves 5 of them for itself. So out of 256 possible addresses from 0 to 255, you only get 251. Now, they don't use all 5. There's a couple of them that are just marked reserved for no particular reason. But when you're thinking about sizing your networks, always keep in mind that Amazon keeps 5. And that's why there's certain ones where it just makes no sense for you to provision because you'd get none. They wouldn't even let you. Within the 533 course, I was showing it, setting up Azure virtual machines, in the settings of the virtual machine, you can choose from 4 different languages, Java, PHP, Python, and .NET, and you can choose the version numbers that you want to get installed. And I had made almost a throwaway comment that said, when you're, if you're not going to use PHP, if you have no plans to use PHP, you might as well just turn it off, right? And I had a student who pointed out, why would you turn it off? And the answer is that when you're thinking about security, there's this concept of like this hardening of your environment, and that includes closing all the ports that you don't need, not having software installed that you don't need. Don't use, if you're doing WordPress, don't have plugins that are installed but inactive. Like just remove all the stuff that you don't need, and that includes like not having PHP or Python. Like don't have Python installed on your computer, even your home computer, if you don't have a specific need for it, because you just don't know that there's a 0-day exploit out there. Someone can find a way to get a file onto your machine, and because you have Python already installed, they just need to do something and it will execute. So it's just a rule that I live by. I don't know about you, Sean, but if you don't need something and you're using a publicly facing internet system, don't have it.
Yeah, so it's the concept of attack vectors, right? So the broader your footprint, the more attack vectors you have. And so one of the best practices we talk to clients about all the time is don't go with the basic instance types or AMIs or whatever you want to call them on the public clouds. Create your own, and create your own in a hardened lockdown way. We recommend, particularly for some clients, that they literally install nothing except the absolute bare minimum number of services on, say, Windows or whatever, right? And then they use orchestration or they use automation to install that stuff after it's been created. So you deploy your packages after the installation. That way you can control what's being installed. That from a security perspective, I think the bigger problem is even maybe less than 0 a day. It's that most people just don't patch very well. Like
Right.
they just don't have a strong enough regimen around patching. So you install a Windows server and it's got, .NET running on it, and you then smash in, PHP. Well, unless you're actively updating those things all the time, you're exposed. And a lot of people just think, well, I'm not using PHP, but it's on there anyway. And so they've just left it open, and they probably haven't patched it, right? So that's the big problem. That's you really want to minimize your footprint for people to come after you,
Right.
As little as possible that you need to run. And then there's some performance benefits, right? Like just not having that stuff marginally improves
That's
performance. True. So you try and keep things at a minimum. So that's a good question. That person should get swag.
Imaginary T-shirt.
Bitcoins.
I applied for Amazon merch. I did apply for Amazon merch. It's going to take a year or something to get approved for that.
Really?
So yeah.
Oh, just use Cafe Press or something.
Yeah. Buy someone else's merch.
Yeah.
So those were the questions. Keep them coming. Again, if you have questions, join the Feeling Cloudy group. It's feelingcloudy.com/FB. URL is below. Ask a question, and we'll answer it in the group, and we'll read it on the show to answer it. Or if you're in the Amazon AWS course or in one of my other courses, if you ask a question, there's a chance that we'll bring it up here if it's a good question. So make sure they're only good questions are being asked there.
Yeah, because otherwise we ignore you.
So I guess we're a week after AWS reInvent now, and that was sort of like such a frantic week where Amazon was announcing 3 or 4 or 6 things a day. If you tried to follow their blog, they were just scrolling off the page, and it was the same for the same day. You were going to multiple pages. One thing that we came away with was, and I was talking to someone at my office this week about AWS Guard Duty. I don't know if you've had a chance, but the Guard Duty product is sort of like a threat detection service that you can throw onto your AWS. You just sort of enable it to your account in the management console, and it'll automatically start analyzing sort of all of the events that happen across your AWS account, and will raise those as potential alarms, so they can determine if there's attackers or if there's some kind of anomaly in your workload. Suddenly you spin up 500 servers, and suddenly, you know what I mean? So I think the people in the ops world are really excited about Guard Duty.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. It's kind of a slight variation on your traditional IDS, IDP kind of intrusion detection prevention type stuff, right? It's really more around your AWS account and looking at abnormal behaviors. The really fascinating thing about it is when you hear people at Amazon talk about it, it kind of shows the evolution of big data and data analytics, right? So, or AI, I guess, if you want to use that phrase. What's actually happening is the more information they get, the better the analytics and intelligence becomes, because it's adaptive, right? So right. It's quite a fascinating development in that space, and I think it's also an acknowledgement that a large portion of the customers who are using AWS, and it would be the same for Azure, are what you would call medium level savvy. They're not the high end of tech savvy. We're not talking Netflix and Dropbox here. We're talking just normal people, normal humans, and they need help because security is becoming an ongoing bigger problem for these folks in cloud. So and also developers are more prone to leave things open than they are to leave them closed. So
right.
because it's easier, right? Development's lazy. It's the lazy function. The easiest way you can do something, the better it is for you. And so they leave things open by default. And so that's really, that's where I think Guard Duty will be actually really interesting as time develops. So, yeah.
Pretty smart of them to, I think, in talking with some people within where I work, the security is a huge focus. I mean, we had a really amazing in a bad way year for hacking events. Yahoo was hacked 5 years ago, but we only just found out that like 3 billion accounts were taken or something. The Equifax hack was huge. And, every week we're hearing about a massive, like the Game of Thrones was stolen, and the company that was HBO was held ransom over their content. So, in a way, it's like this whole thing of security is becoming, like in a lot of companies, red alert. We're getting consulting companies are coming in and doing threat assessments. We're locking everything down, and just sort of it becomes a not panic, but I mean the amount of security products that are being installed all over the place it's amazing. I don't know the ratio of how much companies spend on security versus development these days, but I imagine the security element is just going up.
Double-digit growth easily every year in budgets in security. And I have a really interesting experience from this week. We're doing a review of a proposal that was going into a client for a hybrid cloud, predominantly private, but a little bit of public for test dev. And they're a medical company. They run hospitals effectively. And that's an industry like that industry is at a crossroads. So people go to doctors less now. They go, which is interesting. And when they go, they're armed with more information. And that's because of things like Fitbits and iPhones and all these monitoring devices. You know how well you sleep, you know what your blood pressure is, you know how much activity you do, you know your resting heart rate. And we all know this stuff. Think back 15 years ago. Nobody knew any of that. So now there's all this data that's being generated. And so the medical industry is having to do something with that data. So they're building these big giant data lakes, right? As he drinks from his NASA mug. And
I'm all about the space this week.
Yeah. And so they're building all these giant data lakes, and that's a massive honeypot for hackers, right? Imagine getting people's normalized medical information, what you could do with that, right? And then tracking that back to an individual. Like, that's crazy. But interestingly, the medical industry has to figure out how to do value adds to that for two reasons. One, they have to figure it out because that's what the customers want. But the second reason is it's actually financially in their best interest, because if they can work out that, the bulk of their patients are now between the ages of 40 and 50, and they're not particularly mobile, so they're rather sedentary, then they know what the next 10 years of their services look like, so they can adapt accordingly. Really fascinating stuff. Problem is security.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
yeah.
So this proposal that we pulled together, this is a fairly significant number, north of $20 million kind of thing. And I'd say 25% of the entire proposal was dedicated to cybersecurity. And, that's a year ago, it would have been 10%. People would have wanted to know, okay, what's your cybersecurity posture? What's your thing? Now it's detailed, and not even that. We're seeing the interesting element being transition in. So not only do you have to have solid security, but how are you going to get us to that point?
Right.
Which is, again, that's a sort of level of maturity you're starting to see in the market, which is really interesting. So yeah, I think the whole security space is a massive, massive growth area. It will continue to grow because it's, every week somebody's getting done, everybody's getting owned. So So that's interesting.
Yep.
The other interesting announcement that came out of AWS reInvent that you and I didn't talk about was inter-region VPCs.
Right.
And we should have maybe talked about it. So if you're not familiar with the way AWS and Azure and public clouds work, each region is isolated intentionally. It's its own physical thing, and that's to provide a certain level of resilience so you don't bring down their entire cloud, right? Which is smart. And
yeah.
But with Amazon, it has always been diabolical to make things work multi-region. It's always been really hard, and you always have had to own the connectivity between regions. And you kind of knew Amazon was going to fix that. You just didn't quite know how. So they've released their inter-region VPC, so now you can create the sort of virtual private circuit between regions. And you don't have to use like direct connect to route everything around and pay through the nose for that kind of stuff. So that's going to be a game changer for companies that have the need for multi-region failover, multi-region disaster recovery, or they just want to do distributed computing, which is kind of the whole point of cloud originally. So that's interesting. That was a quiet little thing that got slipped in at reInvent that maybe didn't make it out in the wider public.
Yeah, it's not sexy, that's for sure. It's only people who've been in the knee deep into trying to create those large types of networks across availability zones will even notice the benefit of that. But yeah,
networking is always the least. Networking followed by security. They're like the two least sexy elements of doing anything. They're just the boring, hard stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the security though is getting there. Like with the growth of security, if you've got strong security credentials, if you're certified and you've worked at some big companies doing the security, got some wins under your belt, man, like that's going to be such an in-demand skill. Security is so hard, your mind just sort of, sometimes you get a headache just thinking about all of the different attack vectors and ways that people are getting in, and we've got requirements. The business needs to still operate. The video producers in Edmonton still need to upload files into the Toronto server in order to get the show on the air. So life still has to go on. It's just you can't just lock your doors and put up a big wall.
I give so when I deal with solution architects or junior enterprise architects, and security comes up, I always give them the exact same piece of advice. You need to be smart enough to know when it comes to security that you probably don't know a lot.
Yeah.
Like I accept my general ignorance around security, and I would argue I probably know more than 90% of the public, but then you surround yourself with people who know everything there is to know, because the moment you think you know enough is the moment you don't know enough.
Right.
So that's a good rule of thumb. So what else you got? What other news is big for you?
So the there was a Kubernetes conference this week, so KubeCon. I haven't really been following that, I'll be honest, but I know that Azure has released what's called Azure Container Instances, which is a managed container service. No VMs. You don't have to spin up clusters and add nodes to it and things like that. Really, you just upload your container into the cloud, and Azure takes care of the rest. But at KubeCon, they were introducing these. Now, with all these acronyms, it gets a little bit crazy. Kublets, it's KUBLET. Like there's more interfaces and more ways to integrate Azure with these containers, Kubernetes containers. I just wanted to point it out again. When you go to the website talking about all of the stuff that KubeCon and the releases that Azure put out, it's one of those things that's like, man, there's so many acronyms and so many buzzwords in there. Like you'd have to spend a week just to look up every word to understand what it is that they're so happy to announce, you know?
Well, it's interesting. So at ReInvent, they did EKS, so Elastic Cloud for Kubernetes or whatever. Basically EC2 for Kubernetes. And they also released Fargate separately, which is sort of the, I guess it's the solutionless solution for Kubernetes on AWS. And I look at the way that Azure and Amazon are moving towards Kubernetes generally as they're behind, and they're just announcing a bunch of stuff, and they're just figuring, well, we'll string it all together when we get to it. I think the strategy is probably a little bit lacking right now. It's like, let's just throw stuff against the wall, see what sticks. Yeah, they're having to, right? I think that whole container orchestration and all that stuff has just been a lot bigger than they assumed it would be, and now they're trying to figure it out and catch up. Now, when you spend the billions and billions of dollars that these guys spend a year on R&D, well, catching up is just it's a function of time more than anything else, right? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So, yeah, I mean, just on that sort of side topic, I heard, from a reliable third-party source that I know here in Sydney, that Azure in their data centers in Sydney are having so much growth that they're adding 10 fully populated racks of servers a week. And just that, and that's just to keep up with demand. So you can see these guys have to consistently figure out how to innovate in the services area, because the compute layer is just becoming saturation. There's just they can't keep up with demand on that side, so they have to figure out how to do services better, which is interesting. That's where that differentiation happens. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and not to get too much on a tangent, but when Azure does their clusters, they're self-contained units, right? So they manufacture these things almost like it's like a train car, you know. It's just they just pop it in, they plug in the electricity, they plug in the water, they plug in the network, and it's a box of racks ready to go, you know. Yep. So it's,
customers refer to them as pods. So we get one of the bid I was working on for most of October. That's what the client wanted. They wanted pods they wanted discrete pods in each of their data centers, and the head of IT operations, his comment was, I want you to back your truck up to the data center. I want you to roll your pod out. I want you to plug it into the electricity and one blue cable into the network. And I want your pod to be fully operational.
Wow.
And so, that's the thinking now. It's just this pod of compute storage and then services attached to it. So we want PaaS services that come out of that pod as well. So we want, VDI as a service. We want database as a service, all that sort of stuff, right? Really. Yeah. And that's becoming the norm now. Like that, I'm seeing that a couple times a month from clients, which is phenomenal. But it is pods. It's the evolution of, the converged infrastructure framework. So a few years ago, there was a lot of VBlocks and stuff, which were just effectively an enclosed rack that you got VMware access to. You see it a little bit with things like Nutanix and VxRack and VxRail from EMC, Dell EMC. So now, but it's now even more. They want that pod to be hybrid, so they want that pod to extend out into the public cloud, which is where Azure Stack will be really interesting. I mean, I think in a year or two, when Microsoft actually land that properly, Azure Stack's going to be kind of fascinating. Right now it's not, but it will be.
Cool. The other thing that I saw Azure announce this week was location services. I mean, this is definitely a logistics play. So they're working with companies like TomTom and Esri, which is a global mapping GIS company. So you can imagine being able to see your trucks on the road. I was going to use like the Amazon delivery guy example, but of course Amazon's not calling Azure location-based services, but any sort of fleet of trucks on the road, you can basically maybe all this stuff that Uber had to do, do a mapping application built in, a navigation application, traffic services, all that stuff. So again, it's all available. I was saying last week how amazing it is. It's all available to the normal humans. So if you ever want to like make your own logistics app, Azure has a whole bunch of location services they announced. And
probably the other thing I wanted to talk a bit about was the single sign-on from AWS that came out this week. Post ReInvent, they released some new services, and one of them is single sign-on. Now, I don't know. I've dealt a little bit with Okta and OneLogin, so I've worked with those tools, which are the two biggest of the cross user repository single sign-on mechanisms, and they're good tools. Like Okta is the market leader and all that stuff. They're really clumsy. Like it's just not easy to use them. And they're SAML based and there's lots of whatever, but they're not the easiest thing in the world to integrate. And Amazon would appear to have found that gap as well, and now have released their own single sign-on for their own services, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. That if you're going to be able to have a user information repository in Amazon, having the ability to integrate single sign-on into your applications that you're building on Amazon services makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And of course, Microsoft has been sort of the king in this space. They had the Active Directory product that's installed in enterprises all over the world, and then they've extended that with Azure Active Directory, B2B, B2C. Now they've got domain services in the cloud. So Microsoft has sort of been over the years building on their legacy of this Active Directory legacy. And I know that this new AWS Single Sign On does work with the Active Directory because, of course,
it has to.
Yeah, and I mean, what would it be if it didn't? But I think there's some, this is sort of like tit for tat a little bit, where Azure had this legacy, and Amazon's like, well, you know what, we really need to support this.
Well, yeah, and it's all about practicality too, right? Like you mentioned, Azure or AD is everywhere. Like Active Directory is pretty much everywhere. You very, very rarely in the wild see anyone not using it. I ran across one, I think it was back in August, where the client said to us, look, we use Google. And it was just like everyone looked at them quizzically. It's like, okay, but how do you connect that to AD? Oh, we don't use AD. Really? Like, seriously? You don't? And no, we use it reminded me of I ran into a government department not too long ago who were still using Novell for all of their user authentication and identification. And and that was in the context of, okay, we now submit, we have to move this to Active Directory and spend a lot of money doing that. But yeah, there's occasionally you'll get people who will say, no, I'm all open source and I use this or I use that. I've also seen a couple of companies, small, I have to admit small, who use Facebook a little bit. So Facebook authentication for some stuff, which is really weird. But yeah, AWS makes a lot of sense for their own application stack. But without that AD integration, it would be frankly worthless. So it's interesting.
Yeah, that was, sort of the big, like I said, I think there's a little bit of a hangover after reInvent where they've dumped all this, a lot of, like you said last week, a lot of it is sort of future announcements and vaporware. And so I think they've sort of spent the magazine is empty, and now they just have to start delivering on some of these promises.
It'll be interesting to see. So without trying to predict the future, one of the things these companies are excellent at is public relations and getting attention for themselves. So it'll be interesting to see over the next few months anyway, how many of these announcements that were done at reInvent or, before at the Microsoft conference, only a few weeks earlier, how many of these they re-announce. Right. So they have another big launch for in 2 or 3 months' time. Oh, we've just released Fargate. It's going to be transformational, and they'll use that word transformational a lot. And it'll be interesting to see how many of them do that and try and get a second round of mileage out of these things. Because absolutely, that's what's going to happen. Because a lot of this stuff, I went back and had a look at some of the stuff that was announced, and it was pretty bare bones. It was 2 dudes on a PowerPoint going, yeah, that'd be awesome. Let's do that.
Yeah, I think they'll have to. I think because a lot of these announcements got lost or got buried, or it's sort of they have no choice but to when they're finally available to finally launch them.
Yeah, I had a conversation this week with a guy who was at reInvent, and I said to him, "So what was it like?" And he said it was like standing in the middle of a boxing ring and getting punched for 5 days. He said it was all sides. I was just getting hammered with stuff from everywhere. He said, I actually don't even remember half of it. And they just completely overwhelmed this, pretty intelligent guy, just completely and utterly overwhelmed him. And his one takeaway was one of the banks here in Australia presented at one of the keynotes. And that was the only thing he could remember. He said, the only reason I remember is because I knew the bank.
Yeah.
So he spent, $10,000 going over to a conference and doesn't remember any of it because it was just too much to remember. I think he may have imbibed in a certain fermented beverage too much, but that's just my.
Yeah. Hey, he's not here to defend himself, but I can imagine it's overwhelming. If we go next year, but it's, Vegas spread across half of Vegas, just flash and sizzle and vendors and people trying to sell you stuff. And
what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
Except for AWS, which gets onto all the websites. And
if we go, you have to get a face tattoo.
Have you not Mike Tyson?
Have you seen The Hangover where the guy? Yeah, that's it. You're gonna get a face tattoo.
Did you hear that tattoo is copyrighted, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so the movie The Hangover used it without
permission.
And so it was a lawsuit. Took years, and they finally had to pay the guy off for the rights to that tattoo image. So no, I'm not getting a face tattoo. I don't have that kind of money.
Okay, fair enough. Anything else you want to go over?
This isn't totally cloudy stuff, but it really hit me this week. Once now AWS is over, and we're just thinking about how 2017 went, and it really struck me. There's an article, I'll put it into the group on from Recode, how if you project out Amazon into the future, they're just winning in all these categories. They've got their Amazon.com is everywhere you go to buy stuff, and now they just rolled out in Australia. Congratulations!
Thanks. It was a big moment for me.
Yeah, well, for everyone, right? But I mean, I'm a Prime member, and I'm sure 50% of the United States is a Prime member. I don't know what the numbers are, but it's some huge amount. Netflix has 80% penetration. Prime has got to be second for 50% or 40%. And they bought Whole Foods, and so they're getting into. I went to Whole Foods a couple of weeks ago, and it was a wonderful experience again. They're just winning all they've got their services, AIs, and things like that, and retail. They're going to do clothing. They're going to do. I don't know. I think just Amazon's whatever Jeff Bezos did. He set up his company to just dominate in many different ways, and it's sort of. I'm almost tempted to go buy Amazon stock, even though they're ridiculously overpriced. But
they now have in the U.S. 75 million Prime members. So
Netflix has 80 million. Netflix has 80 million subscriptions, I think. So very close.
Yeah, you just need to run the numbers. It's $100 a year, and there are 75 million.
Yeah, money
That's
doesn't matter. It's like owning. Like my wife is buying stuff on Amazon now. She for years didn't, and now that I have a Prime membership and she knows it's free shipping, she's like, "Hey, are you planning to buy anything?" And I'm like, "No." She goes, "Okay, well, I'm gonna." She added something to the cart and she's just gonna buy it. So Amazon is now online shopping in this house. That's when you go online shopping, you are using Amazon.
yeah, it's here in Australia. So they did launch this week in Australia, and they've been playing this little game with the Australian market going back for a couple of years. Australia, it's interesting. Bezos is a very, very smart guy, right? So, and he's predatory. Let's be honest. He's a predator. He's a predator, and the Australian market has some of the highest margins in retail anywhere in the world. In fact, at one point, Coles and Woolworths, the two largest grocery stores here in Australia, they were 1 in 3 in global margins for grocery stores in the world up until about a couple of years ago when they got into a big price war. But their margins are phenomenal. That's just blood in the water for a guy like Bezos, right? Like he just sees that and says, okay, well, I'm going to have some. So they've started setting it up. The problem here in Australia is logistics. And so what's happening is, which is phenomenal, right? To watch is that Amazon, everyone thinks Amazon's going to change the retail landscape. No way, man. They're going to change the logistics landscape of the place. They're going to make it. And they're saying that within 6 months or whatever, they're going to have a scenario where they'll be able to do 2 and 3 hour shipping in Sydney and Melbourne. Now, I go to the postal service and I try and get something done in Australia 2 or 3 days, like at best, right? And so if Amazon can crack that nut, they'll own it. And they're talking about $200 million in sales in 4 weeks leading up to Christmas. I mean, in the Australian market, that's massive. Like, and they just launched. Prices aren't great, and there's a lot of third-party rubbish, and it's not always free shipping, and there's all these little caveats. But everyone's like, "Oh, this is a bit disappointing." No, man, you don't understand how Bezos works. This is them They're buying data right now. They're making you pay to tell them how to fix the service, and then when you'll like it even more. So when they release Prime next year here, they'll blitz the market. They'll own the place. And nobody's going to keep up with that. And that's the problem, right? It's like the retail sector can't evolve fast enough to keep up with them. He's a machine.
Yep. Yeah. So think about 10 years from now, this, it just seems like he hasn't had a really bad loss in a while. So
yeah, I mean, the last one was when they bought all those warehouses in the U.S. and all the distribution, and then had to get rid of them all because they'd overextended themselves and stuff. But
and governments are coming after them for taxes. Like maybe the worst part is the regulation where now the states in the U.S., if you have a presence in the U.S., then you have to collect states tax, and so they're actually kicking off affiliates. If you live in Wisconsin and you're an Amazon affiliate, you got kicked off because Wisconsin wanted to charge Amazon a tax.
Oh, look, I mean, it's, that's what's kind of happening is you're seeing it in Europe as well. Without getting into the politics of it, I understand why governments are doing it, but like here in Australia, our sales tax is collected federally, same in Canada, right?
Yeah.
It's just, for a company like Amazon, it's just logistically so easy, right? They just, okay, we'll charge 10% GST and we'll remit it to the government, and then that's it. We're done. And it's easy. And the only downside for them is the government can work out how much money they're making, but they don't care. Like, so what? They'll pay some tax, big deal. They'll move on, right? They'll figure it out. We'll pay it anyway. Interesting.
Never mind. The government will give them a huge tax deal to get their HQ too.
Oh,
so we're going to basically no taxes for 10 years. Come to Toronto.
I totally reckon Toronto's going to get that. I
hope so.
I have a feeling HQ2 will land in Toronto, and I think that'll make America have an absolute spasmodic episode because it does highlight, realistically, countries like Canada are smaller and more nimble in certain elements. They can be a little more aggressive, and that kind of lack of efficiency to what you described, where the individual states are trying to charge tax and stuff like that. It's just not efficient, and companies like Amazon just aren't going to do that as they grow. They're just not going to be able to logistically. So that's interesting.
Well, maybe we've gone far enough down
that rabbit hole.
That rabbit hole. But I thought that was that was the big. At the end of the week, I'm like, man, who can stop Amazon? Not even Walmart.
They will either they will trip over their own feet or whatever. Interesting. I thought probably a year ago, I thought Amazon shareholders would demand that they split AWS out, because it is just financially a monster, that business. But I don't think they will now, because I think Amazon itself is I think Bezos has kind of turned a bit of a corner on the Amazon business as well. So I don't think that he's going to get any pressure being the richest man in the world. He will be able to do whatever he likes, I think. So, I don't know. You got anything else for this week, or are we good?
I think that's it.
I've been sniffing and rubbing my nose, just for the people watching or listening. I'm not a cocaine addict. I just seem to have had, for the last hour, I've seemed to have a runny nose, which is
or better yet, it's not the cocaine that's causing this. It's something else.
That's right. Don't say that. The CIA and the Australian intelligence services will come.
Okay.
So that's about it for now. If you want to go to the Facebook group, it's feelingcloudy.com/FB. You can go there and ask questions, do whatever you want. And then if you want to buy our AWS Solution Architect Preparation kind of course on Udemy, the best way to get to that is feelingcloudy.com/AWS-SAA. Anything else?
And leave a review. Don't forget, if you're in those courses, leave a review, and we'd love to read your name. And I promise not to butcher it. So please do. Nope, that's it. I'm Scott Duffy. That was Sean Kay. Find us online, and we look forward to seeing you guys again.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.